Hello, everyone. This is your host, Sahar once again, conducting this session for virtual interactive summit for Texas Pharmacist Society. Before we begin, please note that this session will be recorded to be shared on social media later. But if you have any questions or concerns, please you can put them in the chat box from the very beginning. But please keep your audios and videos turned off up until we begin the Q&A session toward the end. Before we officially start this session, I would like to highlight some serious stats over here that are related to our pharmacy profession. In 2006, BLS projected the growth of pharmacist employment for the next 10 years to be 21.7%, which, by the way, was double of the national average for that year. Now, coming back to what we have right now, in 2019, BLS projected the same growth rate, which was declined from 21.7% to negative 3%, which means that by 2029, we should be seeing 3% less jobs for pharmacists in the market. And having said that, we are right now 15,000 pharmacists graduating from US pharmacy schools only per year. However, I do see some good thing over there as well, that BLS is also projecting that we can see some growth in the employment of pharmacists in other healthcare sectors like hospitals and clinics, which actually leads us to conclusion that the one possible solution to the problem can be to spread pharmacists in other healthcare sectors instead of saturating them to one traditional community or the retail pharmacy segment. This led me to invite Ms. Julie Montiel as our guest today because she has a diverse professional history. She, as a pharmacist, not only worked as a pharmacy resident, but also as a clinical pharmacist, clinical instructor, clinical assistant professor, clinical research manager. She also worked with a physician under collaborative practice agreement with a prescriptive authority. She also worked as an MSL and other relevant roles in the GSK, as well as in the Janssen Pharmaceutical by J&J. And with the most recent title as National Scientific Director. So now coming back to Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me. It's such a privilege to be with all of you today. I'm well, thank you. And yourself?
I am doing great. And by the way, else than being well, I would like to say I am super duper excited to have this conversation with you today.
It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Definitely. So your profile, your career history, it's amazing. And honestly, I would not like to miss even a single bit of it. And which is why I would like to start it from the very beginning by asking what motivated you to start your profession or your career as a pharmacist.
Well, I actually started in pharmacy in my freshman year of college. I got a pharmacy technician job as my first college job. So that's how I was introduced to the profession of pharmacy. And I did that for the 4 years that I earned my bachelor's degree. And it was a good paying job. And at that point, I think I described to you earlier that when I started college, it wasn't my intention to become a pharmacist. That wasn't on my radar. It was a way for me to pay my way through school. But as I got further along in my college career, I think I recognized that, I was interested in that as a profession. I became interested in life sciences as a result of taking more college courses. And so I did apply to pharmacy school and entered actually the first entry-level PharmD program in 1995. So I've been doing this for a while at University of Washington. So that was really my start. And again, I think one thing I do want to emphasize as we talk today is, I think there are some who are lucky enough to know what they want to do up front, and there are others who discover their great choice as they move along in their career. And I had the latter path. So I hope that the folks who are dialed in today, open up their horizons to the many opportunities that pharmacy can provide, because I've surely enjoyed a number of them, as you've briefly described.
Right, right. Absolutely. And I personally think this is a very good idea to first explore what you are doing so that, you can have an idea if you would really like to proceed in this career instead of just jumping into something and not finding it a compatible option for you. So I have another question. I see that you progressed in a lot of different roles and, from the clinical pharmacist to clinical associate, assistant professor, and then clinical research manager. So how did you transition from one position to another, and really what motivated you to try different roles, because these are similar yet very different?
Very good point. So in pharmacy school, it became clear to me early on that the clinical pharmacist role was incredibly interesting to me. So I always had a deep curiosity for life sciences. And I think in pharmacy school, I sought out opportunities to explore that, whether that was leadership opportunities within the School of Pharmacy, intern opportunities. I did my best to try to go down the path of things that would lead me to better understanding or fulfill my interest in life sciences in general. And so, that involvement, that willingness to be involved and to take on those leadership roles really gave me a lot of unique perspectives and opportunities. And one of them that I really enjoyed participating in was teaching. So you mentioned that I started as an associate professor or an assistant professor and taught at the School of Pharmacy as well as the School of Medicine, and also nursing groups within the University of Washington initially within the school. And then after I became a pharmacist and was in clinical practice, I had pharmacy students who worked with me in the clinic, and I continued to teach in those various roles and moved to associate professor. I participated in research, so I explored that also as an avenue for impact where pharmacists can better understand. I focus in supportive care, so how we can best support patients as they move through treatment. And then I also branched out and started speaking for pharmaceutical companies. So while I was still a clinical pharmacist, that was another piece of what I did that expanded on that interest in teaching, was to speak on various topics as it related to patient care. So I think, again, just encouraging folks to open your horizons and look for different opportunities, pay attention to what interests you, because there really is so much that you can do with your pharmacy degree. There's really endless avenues you could pursue.
Definitely, definitely. So I do see that you also work with a physician under collaborative practice agreement with the prescriptive authority. And this is really an area which is, getting a lot of highlight recently. So how did you end up working with a physician, and, how did you transition? And was it that you were already working from some place and you were doing it side by side, or you just shifted your whole role to a prescribing pharmacist?
So I have the prescriptive authority really as a result of an unmet need for patients. So we opened Seattle Cancer Care Alliance in Seattle, Washington in 2000. And, that was a brand new partnership between University of Washington and Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center. We were figuring it out at that time. We just opened the doors, and, staffing models and capacity for the clinic was still something we were working through. And again, I just think that, I urge all of the students listening to really, be curious and be willing to dive in where you see a need, because there were a number of needs within that clinic for patients, and pharmacists are excellent caregivers. And we had a number of pathways where we were involved as prescribers. So anticoagulation clinics, I think, very familiar to pharmacists, but that was one avenue. We also at the time had an anemia clinic, so helped manage patients' anemia. And the one that you mentioned was a pain clinic patient identified need. So within this clinic, it quickly became apparent that we didn't have the staffing, the physician oversight necessary to adequately care for patients with chronic pain. And so myself and a dear friend that works as clinical pharmacist, we wrote a prescriptive authority agreement with the State Board of Pharmacy here in Washington State. And that allowed us to see and care for patients 4 days a week when our attending physician couldn't be there. So we really had the ability to see patients, transcribe care notes, consult with that attending physician, and then prescribe pain medicines to those patients. So we provided that service. That was solely an identified, patient need for myself and the pharmacist at the time that I worked with. And I think, what we found was the State Board of Pharmacy was, very open and willing to have that conversation. And that was a really rewarding part of my career. It really was great to have that autonomy, but also to have that direct touch to patients. It was a great experience.
Definitely. So it was not something that you personally approached a physician and, got under the collaborative practice agreement. It was more of a fact that your university started this thing, right?
Yeah, I would say myself and the pharmacist I worked with at the time, we approached the State Board of Pharmacy. We wrote the prescriptive authority agreement. We got
Definitely.
the approval. So it wasn't something that we stepped into. It was something that we identified and created for the clinic. So that was just very rewarding. And,
Definitely.
again, I think sometimes if you identify things and you're willing to explore them, it can lead you down really rewarding paths.
Right. So one area that really caught my eye was the clinical research manager position that you had. So how was it to work as a clinical research manager, and what really were your key job responsibilities over there? Can you please put a light on this specific one?
Yeah, so I think as a result of being so embedded in patient care, and being pretty, very passionate, obviously, about the role of the clinical pharmacist, I expanded my interest into clinical research. So I had, as a result of working in the pain clinic, I had a number of research. One in particular was peripheral neuropathy, and whether we could ameliorate some of the symptoms and side effects of chemotherapy in terms of neuropathy with, at the time it was glutamine, years ago. So that got me connected with the breast oncologist that, led the oncology group. And, he, I think was, we were partners in crime. He had an interest in supporting patients through treatment and appreciated that, I was willing to take initiative there. And we worked together very closely. He put, many of his patients on my study, and I helped him enroll patients in studies. And that really led to him creating a position for me. So finding funding and creating a position where I formally help him full time with, protocol development and clinical research implementation. So that encompasses a lot of things. That was a lot of fun too, because it opened my eyes to, what it takes to put a patient on a clinical research study, and how you, answer questions appropriately and narrow your hypotheses, data collection and analyzing that data, presenting your findings, all of those things. Again, it was an avenue that opened to me because I was open to identifying needs and creating solutions. So,
and you were also open to
my career.
And you were also open to accepting anything that was coming in front of you, instead of just limiting yourself to a particular area or particular segment, right?
Absolutely.
That is awesome, and it's a good advice for everyone in this profession to keep yourself open to anything that is coming in front of you, instead of just limiting yourself to a traditional pharmacy role in the retail pharmacy or a community pharmacy. Even in the hospital, there's so much diversity now. So and then you also moved on to the GSK as an MSL, right?
I did.
How was it working as an MSL, and what were your key responsibilities? What you actually were doing basically over there as an MSL?
Yeah. Well, I want to say that I was a little concerned about moving out of my clinical practice and into a pharmaceutical role. I mean, I think we can all agree that, for me, there were some concerns about credibility or about my ability to participate in critical patient care decisions as a peer with physicians and other caregivers. So I held back from that decision for a number of years. I had a few opportunities and I held back. And I would say that, my personal circumstance at the time led me to that opportunity, along with some encouragement from the very pharmacist who helped me write the State Board of Pharmacy Prescription Authority Agreement. So she had moved on to an MSL role and was leaving that company and recommended that I consider the MSL role. So I did, and like I said, I was a little nervous about that, and I found that I loved it. I found that there was no end to the fascinating things that were happening in a region in the United States that, I had no awareness of. I was so not blinded, but I was very focused on the way that we treated at University of Washington, and it opened my eyes to the incredible physicians and other healthcare providers that were, working in my area. But it also gave me a vantage point to what a resource I could be to patients, even a step back. I wasn't providing direct patient care any longer, but I was providing a crucial role in terms of the information that a provider needs to make safe, effective decisions for care. And that was very rewarding. It was more of a narrowing or a focus of my expertise and my interaction, but incredibly crucial. So I was an MSL for about 4 years, and like I said, I fell in love with that role. And to this day, I'm still working in field medical affairs, but I have a deep passion and respect for the value that we bring to healthcare providers.
So basically, from where I'm understanding is that what I'm understanding is that you were providing information to physicians to equip them better. Was it something like that, or what exactly? In terms of what was your day like, as an MSL? So you were going back and forth with the physicians, and how much was the traveling involved? Because I read somewhere that you have to travel probably to physicians. So how was it overall?
Yeah, so great question. So the role of field medical affairs, pharmaceutical employee is really to provide that support to the healthcare provider that is required, as I mentioned, make safe and effective treatment decisions. You are not allowed by the FDA to promote, so it is separate and distinct from a commercial role. So that's the first thing to say, is that people get very confused. But this is strictly in a clinical consulting capacity to physicians. So you really fill two big roles for those local healthcare providers. One is if they have a particular patient that's tricky, or a population that they need deeper understanding for the medicines that your company produces or has marketed. Maybe they need to know whether you have data in a specific area. That could be, a particular patient population or an individual patient and a characteristic. And they need to talk to you as a peer about, whether the medicine that you represent can be of help, or how they might help manage a particular patient through side effects that are inevitable with any medicine. And so that is a very crucial role, and that really happens in what we call an unsolicited way. So folks reach out to you. You're not approaching them with information. It's very much a supportive, collaborative role. That's one important piece. The other important piece in oncology in particular, which is where I've always focused my career, is on the research component. So helping that physician really frame up, or healthcare provider frame up, how might I most effectively treat this patient over the course of their disease, and what questions are unanswered. Can we work together to create a clinical trial? Either that might be a physician-sponsored clinical trial or a company-sponsored clinical trial to help answer questions, critical questions. You're really That research piece is important as well because you're advancing patient care and outcomes by really, narrowing or closing those evidence gaps that you need to understand to continue to treat patients effectively.
Definitely. So thanks a lot for answering this question in so much detail, Julie. I remember while I was talking to you earlier, you also explained that there are not just the MSL roles in the pharmaceutical industry, but there are some other roles as well where pharmacists can seek their, their career. They can apply for them. So what are those roles?
Yeah, and I didn't touch on the travel part. Let me just quickly touch on that. Um, as an MSL, you're a field medical affairs representative, as I mentioned. So there is normally a travel component to your job, and that can vary depending on where you live and the density of institutions and healthcare providers in your particular territory. So for some MSLs, they rarely get on an airplane. Most of theirs is driving to the institutions within their territory. And for others, there's more significant flying time. So I would say there is a travel component, but it would vary. So if folks have, questions about that, I would, if you're considering a role like that, just know that it would be different based on the company and based on the territory.
Mm-hmm.
Other roles within the pharmaceutical business is, I think, your question. Is that right, Sahar?
Right.
Okay, so as a pharmacist, I would say there are a multitude of opportunities within the pharmaceutical sector. So one that I just described is a field medical affairs role, very concentrated on that peer-to-peer relationship with healthcare providers within a local territory. If you were to consider other opportunities, pharmacists have occupied and participated in leadership roles within marketing as well as commercial sides of the business. But also within internal medical affairs, both US and global medical affairs, there are a multitude of opportunities to better understand, how you plan clinical development for a medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I know pharmacists who are involved as responsible physicians for clinical trials, either writing those protocols or helping with the safe conduct of those trials. There are folks who are involved in leadership roles within global medical affairs, and that really is interesting because that helps you gain perspective on other countries in the world.
Definitely.
And how they get medicines approved by their regulatory agencies and what that looks like. So, there's a huge array of opportunities, and pharmacists have deep respect, I will say, as well as, the visibility that's really required to step into a number of roles. So if folks are interested in that, I do think the key really is to have that clinical experience because the pharmaceutical company, they always need you to provide that perspective, from a clinical practice perspective. But there are also fellowship opportunities that give you some exposure to pharmaceutical companies and the various roles that you could step into. So if folks are interested in a pharmaceutical role, those are available as well and don't require the clinical experience. That was my path, but not necessarily.
But you're saying that there are some options that are also for entry-level pharmacists as well?
Yeah, I would say generally, especially in oncology, stepping into a fellowship role within a pharmaceutical company would be your best route. And there are a number that offer fellowships. And I'm not as familiar, honestly, Sahar, with other therapeutic areas and, their level of comfort for taking in an entry-level pharmacist as an MSL. I would say that one crucial component to being an effective MSL is the ability to have that peer-to-peer relationship. So I would urge folks who, if you think that sounds interesting, to really consider additional training or exposure to clinical practice, because that really will help you with that area and help you secure a job in a medical affairs role.
So definitely we have an idea about the entry-level pharmacists, and then also for the experienced ones. But have you ever encountered any pharmacist that was not graduated from US and was actually a foreign pharmacy graduate? Because there are so many foreign pharmacy graduates coming into US as well, and they are going for all the process that is required in getting licensed. So what was your experience on that?
Um, so I haven't run across as many foreign trained, pharmacists in the pharmaceutical organization as an entry level. Again, more folks who've had some clinical experience, either in another country and then have moved to the U.S. and elected to work within the pharmaceutical business, or folks who took a clinical pathway and then have worked alongside. I think that it would be the same sort of pathway that I would describe for someone who came to the U.S. for training and for their education. If they were interested in the pharmaceutical business, I feel like it would be the same pathway. There are a number of physicians and medical director roles within pharmaceutical organizations, who are licensed in countries outside of the U.S. And then elect to work for pharmaceutical companies. And I would say I wouldn't see a barrier to pharmacists doing a similar thing, but if that experience translates into value to a pharmaceutical company. So if you're not a U.S. citizen, but you're here training, it would be something to consider about what the background and the skills that would be needed to come into a role within a company.
Definitely. So here, having said that, I mean, whatever you said, I understand what you are saying, but I would like to, put a light on something that it's usually when we talk about foreign pharmacy graduates, it's always being, it's been always misunderstood that maybe that the pharmacist is not here and the pharmacist, is in another country or maybe not a citizen. What I was trying to ask in particular was for the pharmacists who are already here and they have passed all the exams and they already have the license here. They are either permanent residents or they are already a citizen. They are not seeking for any visa or anything like that. So that particular segment I was targeting and trying to find out if they have this similar opportunity or is it any barrier for them specifically?
I'm going to say no. I mean, I really am going to say that, the experience that I've described would be the same, whether you are a foreign, based pharmacist. And I understand what you're saying, like you've been educated in the U.S. and you're licensed in the U.S. I've kept my pharmacy license up all these years that I've worked within the pharmaceutical organization. So I started in 2007, so I'm coming up on 14 years. But I know others that have let their license lapse. So the license isn't necessarily required, if that helps. But what would help you, as a licensed pharmacist, is that experience. Another thing to consider, because the pharmacist friend that I have described a couple of times was a Canadian citizen, not a U.S. citizen when I worked with her. And she was afforded, opportunities for visas through working with a pharmaceutical organization. So that's another thing to consider. As many companies, if you have the experience and the the skills that they're looking for, will potentially partner with you, to have a pathway for a visa or citizenship. That's something important to consider as well.
Definitely.
Does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I understand what you are saying, and that definitely helped. So another thing, while I was really looking into what can really help pharmacists to get these positions, I came across another certification that is for medical affairs. It's called BCMAS, Board Certified Medical Affairs Specialist. It was from ACMA. And the best part was that it was not something which was only for the experienced pharmacist, but the requirement was either you have to be a Pharm D or you can have the experience to be eligible to even take that course. And it requires you to it has a self-paced study material, and towards the end you have to pass an exam, and I think it cost about $2,000, something like that. So I have a question that, according to you, how much that is, that is worth it, or how much that can help any pharmacist to land a job in the MSL area or the medical affairs side?
Yeah. So I can only speak for oncology, because that's the only therapeutic area I've worked in. I will say I haven't heard of that, so I haven't come across it. I think board certifications are something relatively new, and so I think for pharmaceutical organizations, having a better understanding of what that means for a pharmacist is evolving over time. I will say the board certification as a pharmacy specialist or as an oncology specialist, gaining more attention and recognition as a valuable certification that helps employers understand levels of expertise and exposure. So while perhaps I haven't heard of that, that doesn't mean that other hiring managers wouldn't have heard of that. But I think the key piece is really to hone in on broadening experiences as much as you can, and then being able to articulate those experiences and how they translate to making you effective in a role in which you're applying.
So like I mentioned at the very beginning about the stats that are really concerning for the pharmacy market, what do you think was the cause, or why pharmacy market suffered so much? And according to you, what would be a possible solution to this, else than spreading pharmacy to different areas or fields?
Yeah, so I think, I graduated from pharmacy school in 1999, so I've been doing this a while. When I graduated, there was a lack of pharmacists. So, we could never hire pharmacists. And I think I've observed over the years, a few things. One is, the number of pharmacy schools that have opened in that time has been, a big number. I think, it's a supply and demand issue. The other thing that we can't ignore is the evolution of healthcare and, the efforts to streamline and create cost-effective solutions for healthcare organizations. So obviously in that time, I've seen a lot more automation than was ever available historically. And I think obviously that's going to affect your demand for pharmacists and for other folks who contribute to patient care through pharmacy. So I think those things are real, but I also see other opportunities opening. So, we talked briefly about, again, I think if you can, as a pharmacist, really focus on some of those clinical skills and perhaps consider additional training, whether that's a residency program or a fellowship, as I described, through a pharmaceutical organization or another like organization, seeking out additional vantage points to differentiate yourself so that you have something to bring to the table in terms of your skill set. And you can really identify that independent curiosity and commitment to patient care. So, I've seen a lot of roles evolve for clinical pharmacists over time, and especially as we evolve as a nation to perhaps evaluating value and then assigning reimbursement to healthcare providers and institutions based on the value that they provide. Clinical pharmacists are very crucial in a number of ways. So there are jobs that have opened up in, having a consulting sort of relationship with healthcare providers and using your expertise to help them better understand where a medicine fits in a formulary, for example, or a treatment pathway. Those are all interesting roles that have opened up. And I've seen insurers create more roles for pharmacists because, again, they need that expertise. I think, it's fantastic that we have so many medicines available to patients. It benefits us all, but it creates a complexity for those who prescribe those medicines and for those who reimburse for those medicines, to best understand how each of those fits or doesn't into treatment for individual patients or populations. So you can really provide a very crucial role in those decisions. But I do think, I feel like we're moving into an era just in general where more advanced training or taking advantage of opportunities beyond just your PharmD program, should be strongly considered to broaden your opportunity and create some flexibility for yourself over the course of your career.
Definitely, definitely. I actually, while you were saying about the evolution of the, pharmacy field, I actually came across another article which was written about a pharmacist. She actually personally approached a hospital, and she had some, several meetings with the hospital administration where she actually explained where she can, start, working with them and really providing some, value to the overall healthcare system. And that was actually about the annual wellness visits and the transition of care and, overall managing the care. So she had several meetings with them, but she eventually ended up creating a job opportunity for herself, and they actually hired her. So this is what we are calling an evolution, where pharmacists are, creating more value, and in return, they are actually getting something in return, which is a very good thing. So uh, thank you so much for answering all the questions patiently. But one last question is
Yeah.
that what is the, one advice that you would like to give other pharmacists who are seeking these roles, or also any other role overall, and that especially are the ones that are struggling for getting a job in the market?
Yeah, I think my strongest piece of advice again is to be an advocate for yourself, and not wait necessarily for something to open up that's very narrowly defined, but continue to seek opportunities for yourself. Be curious, be willing to ask. I think healthcare at large, people they're in the life sciences because they're teachers. So I think people appreciate that. And if you seek out opportunities, I really believe you will find them, and then others beyond those. So I just feel so passionate about the pharmacy profession. I think it's opened so many doors to me and to others. I think there are endless possibilities. And I think my biggest piece of advice is to not let yourself be narrowly defined. If you think there's only one pathway for you to work in a community pharmacy role or a hospital pharmacy role, don't get discouraged, and open your horizons a bit, because there's just an incredible amount of opportunity if you're willing to grab that and explore it. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you so much, Julie, for, once again, for answering all the questions patiently. Now we will actually move ahead to the questions that are raised by the audience. And I already see a few questions over here. The first question and a message from Kasim is that, thank you so much for doing this, Julie. What advice do you have for pharmacy clinical specialists who would like to set themselves up to move into the MSL role in the future, focus on additional certifications, presentations, relationship building? Any insight is appreciated.
Yes. So when I'm hiring someone, I've hired many entry-level MSL from clinical roles. What is most important to me is to be sure that that individual is going to step into a role that will be fulfilling and that they can be successful. So I think being able to demonstrate the ability to have a peer-to-peer conversation with a healthcare provider is important. So, if you can find opportunities to participate in your formulary committee, if you can find opportunities to participate in pathway development, as I mentioned, any evidence-based medicine evaluations and conversations, and then some of the things that I described as well are very valuable. That direct clinical pharmacist care is important as well, because that translates into you being very successful as an MSL in having those types of conversations and providing value to a healthcare provider. I would say certifications, as I mentioned, are gaining more attention, and I would say confidence that it does also give the managing director or the hiring manager some idea of your level of knowledge and your ability to, again, engage in conversational delivery of data. So that's important too, right? Like making things relevant and being engaging. So I think certifications can be important as well. And then last, if you have the ability to explore, as I've mentioned, fellowships or other opportunities where you get exposure to a pharmaceutical organization, and you're able to connect and, really show your interest, I think that can be enormously helpful as well if you're interested specifically in an MSL role.
Thank you so much, Julie, for answering this question. Yeah. We have another question from Ehtishamul Haq, and he says that without a pharmacist license, if you get MSL certification or joining the MSL society, is it helpful to get into the industry? Any career events happen for that you are aware of?
Yeah, so MSL Society is an excellent resource, and they have a number of tools and resources available to those who are interested in breaking into the MSL career from a variety of therapeutic areas. So, clearly I'm very embedded in oncology, but they have a number of national meetings when we're able to be together in a room again. They have a number of online meetings and resources that are incredibly valuable. So I would become a member of the MSL Society if that career is interesting to you. And again, seek out those opportunities and those learnings. There are a number of podcasts available now. So I just completed a podcast, MSL Talk, and that's Tom Caravella who put that together, and he has a number of excellent podcasts on becoming an MSL, great resources for interviewing, what experiences or characteristics are required to be an excellent MSL. So those are all things that if you're interested, I would urge you to dig into some of those and then think how you can, put to use your experience and then really demonstrate that you get the opportunity to be interviewed for an MSL role.
Thank you so much, Julie, for answering another question raised by Ehtishamul Haq. And there is another question from Jamila, and she says, I think partially you have answered it, but I would still like to ask this question one more time, that what certificates or residency would help foreign graduates?
A pharmacy practice residency would help you. A specialty residency would help you if you're interested in a particular therapeutic area, for sure. I, again, would explore fellowships that would be open to you. Whether you're a U.S. citizen or not, you can apply for those and take advantage of those opportunities. MSL Society has some opportunities as well, so I would explore those. Again, I think being a licensed pharmacist isn't always required for a pharmaceutical career. So, I think we look for it and we require it because it gives us a base idea of level of knowledge, but it isn't necessarily required. So I think what is more important is to show your interest and be able to articulate your experience that translates into success in those roles. So taking advantage of those opportunities would be important.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much once again. There is another question again by Ehtishamul Haq, and he is asking, is it, and I think by it he means MSL, anyways related to pharmaceutical sales?
No.
No.
So the FDA is very clear in terms of the function and the responsibilities of the commercial side of a pharmaceutical organization and the medical affairs side of the pharmaceutical organization. So commercial colleagues or sales representatives can promote, so they can, we call it proactive, meaning that you can initiate conversation with a healthcare provider. as a commercial sales representative on, indications that are within the prescribing information for a marketed medicine only. So it's very clear. The FDA is very clear about that. I would say it's very regulated. So all of your materials, all of the messaging that commercial uses to approach healthcare providers, all have to pass, review, and they all have to be consistent with what's in their prescribing information or their label. On the medical affairs side, you can, in an unsolicited way, so this is an environment where a physician or another healthcare provider needs information and they reach out. Then you can provide that information based on that unsolicited question. So you can answer any question based on the data that you have available to you that's within the public domain. So you cannot cross the line of using that information or that relationship to promote a medicine. It's very clear. And in every pharmaceutical organization within standard operating procedures, it's very clear that you cannot cross that line into promotion. So there's a lot of nuance to that, but I think it is important to know that the FDA is very careful to regulate that. And, as responsible medical affairs employees, we're very careful to honor that and respect that. And, be sure that we're contributing, again, to patient outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. I understand what you have explained. I personally, while you were saying this, I personally had a question that I understand the MSL role is not something which is definitely related to sales, but there is a marketing and sales department within every pharmaceutical industry. So do you see
Correct.
pharmacists working in that sector as well?
Yes, absolutely. If you have an interest in that, I've known pharmacists have moved into marketing and commercial sides of the organizations. I think that, once you understand your job roles, like any job role within a pharmacy or within a hospital, you have your book of business, and you learn over time, your role and responsibilities. But yeah, there are lots of pharmacists who are interested in the marketing side of the pharmaceutical industry and what that looks like. And those can be really interesting and rewarding roles. They're just different from a medical affairs role, but you certainly, as a pharmacist, have there if that's of interest.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Julie. I do see our hand raised by Irfan Saud. And sir, I would like to ask you to turn on your video or audio, however you would like to, ask the question. And I have sent you a request as well to start the video. Okay, I think I have missed him.
Okay. What I wanted to ask is that for somebody who has worked 20 plus years in hospital management, and wants to explore the additional opportunities to see what other is available. And of course, this platform is a good one to know all those things. So beside MSL and pharmaceutical sales, what other options are available beside retail and hospital for a pharmacist?
So at large, someone with your level of experience, because that's a lot of experience, I would say you could explore a number of roles. So there are also roles within pharmaceutical organizations for value and evidence MSLs. So those are more related to payers and what payers are looking for. So sometimes that management experience can translate into if you would like to call it like a higher perspective in terms of how evidence contributes to an overall patient population or to a cost effectiveness evaluation for an insurer or an institution. So, for someone with your level of expertise, I would urge you to consider, perhaps some management positions within those sorts of roles, or, having an MSL role there. I just hired someone onto my team not long ago who had 20 years of experience in oncology and significant management experience, and he was interested in exploring the MSL role. So I just, and he's been very successful, has really enjoyed it. So again, sometimes that management, that ability to be critical in terms of overall clinical decisions can work out in your favor. In addition to that, some of the roles that I described earlier would be worth considering too. I mean, I think there are a lot of roles that are developing within insurance companies as well as institutions that require a level of leadership. That 20 plus years of being in management, I think you could definitely explore that and articulate some expertise there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, Irfan, and I don't know if you have any other specific questions about that, but I would, I would consider maybe do some informational interviews with some folks. That might be one area to explore, and then think about what you might be most interested in.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Irfan, for asking this question. We have another question, and I believe it is going to be the last question, unless anyone else asks the question as well. So this question is from Qasim, and he says, what kind of metrics or productivity statistics could an MSL expect to be evaluated by?
Yes, great question.
Great question.
So, so on the medical affairs side, because we do not cross over into promotion or sales, we really rely on our qualitative contributions to healthcare providers. So, for MSLs, because you are field-based, your value to the company is in your relationships with healthcare providers. So, clearly for any company, you have a headquarters, somewhere in the United States, and those individuals really rely on you as a field medical affairs representative to provide that relationship, that knowledge, that working knowledge of how providers and institutions work together and how you can work with them. So that being said, it is important, and these are field-based jobs. You have the ability to be very flexible in your schedule. You have the ability to be the CEO of your territory and really define what works for your territory in terms of interaction. But usually, most commonly, there's a base expectation of how often you'll be interacting with healthcare providers in your territory. So each company's a little different in how they define that, but that really is to, I think, highlight that your proficiency really is embedded in your ability to have, relationships and interaction on a frequent basis with healthcare providers in your territory. So, and again, that varies. It's usually a number of interactions. So, it's meant to demonstrate that proficiency. In addition to that, there are a number of qualitative things that we look at to show productivity and to highlight the level of relationship that we have. So some of those things include, medical insights, which is one way of saying that, it's a two-way conversation from the pharmaceutical organization to the healthcare provider and back. And the MSL plays a very crucial role in describing what's actually happening in patient care. And what healthcare providers need to better understand how to treat their patients effectively. So, medical insights is another crucial component of how we show productivity. Another measure of productivity is are our clinical studies that are so important in demonstrating that efficacy, but also that safety. How are we contributing to making sure those studies are finishing on time? And finishing, safely and meeting the criteria the FDA requires. So MSLs also help a lot with making sure those clinical trials are successful, especially in oncology. I think in some other areas it could vary a bit. So I think all of these components, the qualitative piece is what's important to me as an MSL director, and being able to describe not only how often are you interacting with healthcare providers, but what kind of value are you providing to them. Some companies also will use questionnaires, so they'll actually engage healthcare providers in giving feedback. I haven't worked for a company that's done that, but some do. So that's another way just to demonstrate productivity and your value to the organization and to healthcare providers.
Mhm. That was a good answer. Thank you so much, Julie, once again for answering all the questions patiently. And I think what the one thing that we all learned today from you is to keep yourself open to all the opportunities that are coming your way, and so that you can really evolve. And I think that is the solution to the pharmacist market that is right now as well. But we have all the questions that answered by the what were put up by the audience. So, and I would like to thank you once again, Julie, and I will also like to thank all the participants that joined us today, because this session would not have been possible without the support of you all. So have a good rest of the day, all of you. Thank you so much for joining once again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure as well. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you. And good luck to everyone on the call. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. Same to you. Same to you.
Thanks.